I was a stay-at-home mom and already a teacher when Gloria Silverman asked me if I would come to work with her at the Hebrew school. I had not really even thought about going back to work at that time. I had enjoyed my career with the Public Board of Education, and I was also enjoying staying at home and being a volunteer, especially at the Beth Jacob, in the sisterhood, helping with the Hanukkah dinners, and just having a wonderful time with my family here. When Gloria asked me if I would like to come and teach at the Hebrew school, where my children were already students, I hesitated. I thought to myself, I don't speak Hebrew. I don't even know anymore what I know about teaching Jewish history and all those things. But she asked me to come and sit down with her, and she asked me if I would be interested in teaching about the Holocaust. I am not from survivor parents, but the subject of the Holocaust had always grabbed me. There was no doubt about it. We had a long discussion, she and I, that there was no formal education going on in the Jewish schools at that time in Hamilton about Holocaust. That children were in the public school too young to learn about Holocaust. But she had a vision, and she felt that they were, and that it was time that Jewish children had some formal education about the subject. So I said I'd try it. It really interested me. It interested me to see if I would be able myself to find a way to teach young children about such a sensitive topic. So she handed me a book, and the rest was up to me. There was no doubt about that. We started with a class of 18 students, if you can believe, at the Beth Jacob. Those were indeed the golden years here. She was a wonderful principal, and there were wonderful teachers, and all of us tried really hard to make Hebrew school a pleasant experience. I started trying to figure out how to give the message to young children without trying to make them afraid of the topic, and of course to whet their appetite for what in the end was a lifelong learner. For me personally, it became a challenge, and then it became just something that I looked forward to every week, because my students came alive with the subject. We learned as much as we could learn at that level about the historical overview. We learned about some of the things that had happened to some of the people. We talked about the uprisings. We talked about people trying to fight back. We talked about the heroes. And then eventually I realized that Hamilton had a wealth of people here who had survived. And we started to have speakers come and visit the school. And all of a sudden, the students were not just learning from books, but were hearing firsthand experiences. This actually led us to Yom HaShoah, because at that time in Hamilton, Yom HaShoah, although it was always celebrated, it was never very well attended. And one year, I had the idea that I would take our students to Yom HaShoah and let them participate. And that was, I was told afterwards, turning the corner of the whole Yom HaShoah evening, when all of a sudden people were becoming more interested in attendance because their children were involved, and more importantly, were becoming themselves more engaged in the subject. At that program, I met Nadia Rosa. I invited her to come and speak to the children, and she and I became friends. And by then, I was already hearing that there were things happening in other communities that were interesting to us. We found out, and I had a friend in Guelph who introduced me to, we found out that in Kitchener-Waterloo there had been an ongoing student seminar for high school students. In Kitchener-Waterloo there was a very large Germanic population, and they had, in the Jewish community, talked a lot about several incidences of prejudice that they had lived through. So they had created, I want to say, a template for a student seminar. And at that time, it seemed to me that that was the logical first step here. So having taught in the Hebrew school, I will just say that it was a stepping board for me. Professionally, I, in the end, went back to the Board of Education, where I was a trained kindergarten teacher. And at the same time started with Nadia and Maura Walpert, the student seminar. And I guess, immodestly to say, the Board of Education recognized me in my own profession when I did return to the board as a teacher who had brought and made this bridge from the Jewish community to the Board of Education, and I was honored as a teacher. And it was the first time that the word Holocaust had been said in the chambers at the Board of Education. So for me, the beginning with Gloria, having this idea, seeing that Jewish children needed to have this education, was a stepping stone for me personally in my own growth, professionally throughout all my years, and I've only just retired in the last 3, to my continued involvement as a volunteer in the secular and Jewish community, having actually just finished being a guide and an enjoyable teacher with the Anne Frank exhibit that just left Hamilton today.
When you talk about those kids that you were teaching, how old were those kids?
Well, they were in grade 6. One of those kids happens to have been my own son. He was in my first class. That was the class of 18. And they were around 11, I think, just before their bar and bat mitzvahs.
Can you talk a little bit, speak to a bit about what was the school like in those days? How many kids were in the school? What was the atmosphere in the school? What role did Gloria play?
The school was a fantastic place to be part of. It was a wonderful place to work in. It was a friendly, warm, stimulating place. Gloria was the head chief and bottle washer. There was no doubt about it. Every single thing that happened went through her. She knew about her staff, she knew about the students, she knew about problems, she knew about good things. She was warm to the students, and for me personally, it was the most wonderful way to return to my career, because I had not really thought about going back to work then. And from here, I actually went back to the public board, and I think it was because I had that transition period. And it was definitely with her encouragement. She had a lot of foresight, but I don't think it was her foresight that made this school what it was. I think it was her personality. She made every person feel that they were important. She made me feel that what I was doing was a contribution, and that her feeling about that was important to me.
How did she address the issue of kids not wanting to be in Hebrew school after they've been in school the whole day? How did she deal with that?
Well, we all talked about that all those years. I've talked about that with parents since, professionally. There were times when students couldn't come to Hebrew school because there was a dance recital, or there were dance lessons, or there were hockey games, or all kinds of things. She didn't ever, I think, put her head in the sand, nor, I think, did any of us. We tried our best to make parents understand that Hebrew school was really important. And I know in my own doing for my own children, we just tried to make it a really positive experience so that kids would want to come and not feel that they'd want to miss out.
Almost everybody I know talks about their years of Hebrew school as being a nightmare, a horror, whatever. In the peak years of the Bet Jacob Hebrew School, when Gloria was at her peak, how did kids feel about coming to Hebrew school, do you think? Like, honestly,
Honestly, I will tell you that my own son was one of those people who didn't want to come, didn't really enjoy it. And what I learned as an adult and as an educator, honestly, is that so much of it was the social dynamics. And I don't want to blow my own horn here, and you can take this out of the video, but I'm telling you, in my class, you could have heard a pin drop. My students wanted to come because they were interested in what I was teaching. So I can only speak to that it was difficult, and some of the children said that they weren't interested. But what I realized then, and more even afterwards, is when the students are happy socially, when things were controlled in a proper way to make it a positive environment, then students wanted to come. And in those years, yes, there were always those dynamics. And yes, we had parents ourselves saying, this is boring, what do they need to do? What do they need to know this for and that for and this for? But at the end of the day, really and truly, it was a wonderful place to be.
And can you say something now about when you first became aware of Gloria's presence in the synagogue, unrelated to the school, and your first impression of her perhaps, and then as you got to know her, and talk about the impact that she had on women in the Beth Jacob community?
Yes, I can. I'm from a small town, and my parents, my mother actually was born in Brantford, which was very unusual. She was one of the very first. Came from a small town. My father was from Australia, and they came together in a beautiful story and lived in a center that they worked really, really hard to build Jewishly. And I came from a very small synagogue, and I came from a Hebrew school that I guess I would have been one of the ones you could have described. I didn't want to go to Hebrew school because there was nothing there for us. Through my parents' drive and determination, they provided for my sister and for myself as sound a Jewish education and background and home as they could, with a very Zionistic approach. So I'm not from here, and Les and I moved here 42 years ago, which was, I just say because we were, each of us, from small communities, and we came here from St. Catharines. So when I came to Hamilton, to me, this was a huge center. And what was in this synagogue for me but her, Gloria? She had made people like me, and I just speak for myself, people who had a background, a Jewish education, a Jewish neshama, and a Jewish home. She made us feel welcome here. She made me feel welcome. So my first experience in the community was with Hadassah Witzel, and immediately we joined the shul. So my volunteer work was divided between Hadassah Witzel and for here. And I think the very first thing she asked me to do was to come and help on the Hanukkah dinner. And I remember, honestly, I remember her picking up those pieces of chicken and whacking them with duck sauce that she was famous for. I remember all the feathers still on the turkey, thinking to myself, okay, this is what you call community living. And the kitchen was a hubbub, and the people were talking and visiting and brought their babies, and it was quite the place to be. And all of a sudden, for two of us, Les and I, who had one child at that time, all of a sudden we had, without even knowing, people individually, a community. And we felt very much welcomed into the shul. as a result, we're here to this day.
Who else would be able to speak to that? The whole, like what you just said, the whole kitchen thing, Gloria in the kitchen and whacking, whatever you just said about the chicken, that was a great line. Who else could I interview that would have a great,
Rosalie.
okay.
Rosalie comes to my mind, and she's a past president here
Yeah,
too.
no, I interviewed Rosalie but not about Gloria so much.
Judy Kaplan. I remember being here with her, because what happened, as you know, is that if you had kids the same age, and if you weren't working, and if you this and that, depending on your circumstances in life, Judy spent a lot of time here too, in that kitchen. And those were the fun days. Bev Lasky, I remember, like that was my crony group too. Joy, I remember her so much in the kitchen. Judy Kaplan and I seem to spend a lot of time whacking those turkeys. And that, to this day, I will tell you, I can carve a turkey because of Gloria Silverman. We had all these turkeys and we all stood there, and she taught us how to carve them. And we, in the end, came to carving a turkey because of her. And now my kids can cut a chicken and carve a chicken because of those lessons.
Okay, in terms of kids, like in your memory, can you recall any kid who's obviously not a kid anymore that I could interview that would have something to say about Gloria's influence on his or her life? Anyone you know who had it particularly impacted by her?
Well, I think that the impact comes from Campermar. I think that we can say that about the ladies and about the Beth Jacobs Sisterhood, and she was such a meaningful person in my life that my mother and I, you were part of this, were honored by bonds, and I asked Gloria if she would give the tribute because she had known us and known me so well, and seen that where I'd come from to where I'd gone, I guess. In terms, seriously, of the, I don't want you to videotape this part. What happened is, and I'm sure, and you know this, you were part of it, there were the Beth Jacob kids and the Academy kids. And the Beth Jacob kids, in her best years, were mostly the children in the schools, not to say some of the academies weren't, really were influenced by her involvement in Campermar. And to this day, I would say many things about Campermar. Naomi, well, my 3 children will tell you to this day that they got more out of Campermar than ever, even what they got here, and that is because of her. Naomi met her husband because of Campermar. Elizabeth, to this day, who is now a PhD and living in New York and the whole shebang, because of her involvement in the Hebrew school here, even taught Hebrew school in New York to get herself some extra cash, but to this day is still involved in Campermar with some link to it and still interested in it. Aubrey still, he's been all over the world, Aubrey, and still has his friends from Campermar. So that our community, I always felt, was Beth Jacob. And I was thinking about that when we were thinking about the reunion, that I think of it more, my kids think of their memory of community as Campermar. And really and truly, that was because of her. There were years when there were 3 buses that met here in this parking lot and went to Campermar filled with kids that came from this Hebrew school. And those kids went through the whole system, many of them, right up to the top. And all of them really and truly will tell you this day that their involvement there is what formed them. My own students, kids, they went from Campermar, they went to Israel on the seminar, and every one of my own children went on the March of the Living. And I think that was all really and truly because she set that stage. I don't know if it would have happened without her. So I give her credit for that.
What was she at Campermar? What was her role at Campermar?
I think that the rabbi himself was scholar in residence at that time. And I think she seemed to have some type of invisible role where I saw that she was, I think, a consultant to the director at that time. I was myself privy to go there a few times because coincidentally my sister, who's in Toronto, was the nurse there. So I actually stayed on site for several years for short periods of time. And I think officially she was the kitchen consultant. I think she did the menus and the food. But I realized because I was on site, that she knew about everything in that camp. And I think it is more than fair to say that she looked out for the Hamilton kids. And if there was a link that needed to be, she was the link. If you needed to really know about your kid, if she didn't know, she was at least privy to find out.